I'm Jessie Chu. I'm going to show you a few paper manipulation techniques that every paper flower artist should know. These techniques have served me well, and I use them across a multitude of my paper flowers, depending on how I want the paper flower to look like. I believe these techniques will help you as well. So let's go. This is the cupping technique, and what you do when you're asked to cup in instructions is to determine the top side and the inside of the petal. So if this is the inside of the petal, then you're cupping in. If this is the outside, make sure it's away from you when you're cupping. And what you do is you press your thumbs into the paper, and as you do that, you're pressing in and pushing away from you like this. You'll use your index finger and middle finger to support the back to act as counter pressure as you're pressing in. So what I've done here is cup quite extensively. If you look at the side, you'll see that there's a huge curve here. It's quite deep. And that's what you do when you cup. A similar technique is reverse cupping. And again, you're going to determine which side is the inside of the petal and which side is the bottom. So this could be the top or inside, and then this one could be the bottom or the side that you don't want to see. So if that's the case, then we're really working on the other side. So this is the back side of the petal. And what we're doing is we're doing something similar to cupping. We're literally pushing our thumbs into the grain lines and pushing it away from us. So we're pushing the thumbs away from us like this, and we're pressing our thumbs in. And so the pads of your thumb should push and create an indent. Again, similar to the cup that we have, except that this is on the other side of the petal. So for example, this one is the cupping that I did. The petal will go this way, assuming the flower is facing upwards. For this one though, because it's a reverse cup, this is actually the bottom or the back of the petal. So the petal is actually going to face this way with the flower face facing up. Now with reverse cups, I like to do more than just a cup. I tend to like to bring my thumbs up here and also pull outwards. So I'm not just pushing, I'm also pulling outwards. So let me show you how that looks like. I'm pushing and pulling outwards. So what I get is a wider petal at the top, and you still get this very drastic curve, but it's not as deep of a cut, and rather it's wider on the petals. And usually the reason why you would use a reverse cup is because you want to emphasize the petal lip or the tip of it, and it's spreading out. And this is actually an alternative way of curling the petal back instead of using a curling tool. Now I've done the reverse cupping here like this. This is quite an exaggerated form. If I was to do it softer, what I would do is continue my way around the petal lip or the back of the petal here, open it up a little bit. So now what we have is still a reverse cup, but it's much softer. You see the petal is much softer, right? It's kind of curling out, but it doesn't have those really harsh curves as this one would if it was just cupped. So that is reverse cupping. Another technique that I love using, and I use this quite a lot in my work, is cup stretching. I call it cup stretching because what I'm doing with my hands essentially is cupping and stretching at the same time. So assuming this here is the top or the inside of my petal, and this is the outside, what I'm doing is I'm both pushing my thumbs in to cup and also pulling my thumbs apart at the same time. That means, of course, that the grain lines have to be going up and down on your petal. So I'm pushing and stretching at the same time. And I'm also kind of, sort of, instead of leaving my thumbs like this, I'm also kind of moving them out this way, moving them out like this. And what this does is it creates a much smoother cup. And my thumbs are not as indented. It's not as deep of a cup, but it definitely looks more natural. And there are times where I just keep doing this until it's pretty much almost flat, actually. And I do this so that now I'm not really relying on the grain lines. I'm relying on the softness and suppleness of the paper, its natural properties of being stretchy. And so this here is my cup stretch that I love to use. Let's talk a little bit about creating curls along the edges of the petal. And there are so many ways to do this, either with your hands, with tools like this, with scissors. So this here is an awl. This is a skewer. This is a shorter skewer. This here is a 16 gauge stem wire, bare wire. This is my preferred one, but there are times when I do want something with a narrow tip that is fat here and very narrow at the tip, because that creates a different shape when you're curling. Likewise, the awl is similar, does a similar trick. So with a petal like this, there's a couple ways in which you can curl the edge, and I'll show you what I mean. So the first way is with scissors, and I know some artists who have been really successful using scissors to do that. And what you do is, assuming this is the top of the petal and this is the side that you want to see, you're going underneath and you're curling. And as you curl, you can either be very stiff about it and make sure that you're not stretching, or you could stretch at the same time. So it provides a really nice soft curl, doesn't it? Look at that. And if I stretch it as I go as well, it does pull out the petal a little bit. It's really nice and soft. So that's one way to do it, where you get a really soft curl. If you want a tight curl, what's worked really well for me is a 16 gauge stem wire. Have these lying around all the time, and all you're going to do again is you're going underneath the petal and you're rolling the petal around the stem wire like this. So if you want to see it the other way, you're rolling it like this, like that. And then when you take it out, you see the curl is a lot tighter than this one. But it's also a really fun way to do it. And then the other ways are using any tools, like I said, that have a sharp, a narrower tip and width. So to demonstrate, you do the same thing. You go underneath, and you're using the same technique as the 16 gauge stem wire, and you're just going to curl it. So if I do it this way, you can see it's like this. But as you can see, this part here is slightly tighter than this part. So it's the effect that you get is different. So this one here is where I'm using 16 gauge stem wire, where the thickness is uniform. And then this one here is where I'm using one that the thickness is not. So you can tell that there's a slight difference. So the tools you use do matter. And to some extent, that's where you can express your artistic preferences. I'm going to show you how to flute or create ruffles on the edges of a petal. And this is one of the advantages of the properties of crepe paper having these grain lines, is not only do you need to, can you stretch it and cup it, but you can also create beautiful ruffles on the side. And all you do is you take your fingers, your thumb and your index finger, along the edge where the the grain line is. And what you're going to do is you are going to slowly just use a tearing motion to create these little ruffles. So all I've done here is create little small tight ruffles. If you want to make bigger ones, all you need to do is use a larger tearing motion. So like this. So I'm exaggerating my hands now, but look how much bigger this wave is. I'm going to do the same thing on this other side, and I'm tearing the other way. And look at that. And then sometimes I make even bigger waves, and I use my entire, almost half of my finger to do that. So I put my petal on my finger, making sure the grain lines are going sideways or diagonal, and then I push with one hand. I take this hand and I pull, and what do you get? You get a huge, huge ruffle. So there are different ways of creating fluted edges and ruffles depending on what you want your petal to look like. So in addition to manipulating what the petal looks like, sometimes you do have to think about the shape of the petal and how that petal is going to attach to the structure of your paper flower. And that structure could be a stem wire, it could be the fringe, it could be a styrofoam ball. And depending on what you want that petal to look like on the structure, it can determine what your petal looks like and how fat or narrow your petal base might be. So obviously there's different ways of cutting your petal, including your petal base. And here I've got a petal base that is fairly narrow. It's not very thick, you can see here. And I've got 3 other ways of creating a narrow petal, which doesn't necessarily rely on an original petal that's cut like this. So these ones here, the petals are cut with a much thicker base, but I've been able to do a couple of fun techniques on them to create a base that is a little bit more narrow, so that if that's what you're looking for in a petal base, you can use these techniques. I'm going to show you how to dart your petals, and this is a technique that I use extensively in my paper flower art. So what I mean by darting is when I take a petal, I want to, since I want to create a narrower petal base, this is one way to do it, and this is a technique that you take from sewing. And if you have dresses or if you have skirts, you'll see darting on the side of your hip to create a narrower waist, in this case a petal base. So this is what we're doing here, which is the same technique. We're going to envision a triangle where there is a pivot point right here at the top of the triangle, and that's where we're going to pivot the overlap. So we're going to overlap from the left side to the right side, or the right side to the left side, that's up to you. And so we're going to take, for me, I like using my left side and coming to meet with my right side, like this. And then I'm going to press the left side down, and using this as the pivot point, make sure that I'm folding along lines, like so. And then what I do is I glue it down. So I'll apply glue to it and I'll glue it down, and I have a petal that has a narrow base, and where the grain lines are actually coming in like this. And when you actually shape your petals, you'll see that it looks very natural doing it this way. Now, another way of thinking about darting is also in sewing. What you would do is normally you would just fold it in half, and you would, what would you do? You would glue this part together, fold it down, and you would use your fingers or your thumb, your nail, to hold it down like this to create that crease, and then you would open it up like so. So it's the same idea, just a different way of approaching how to make the fold. So if I apply glue here, I really am only applying it on one side, and I press it down like this, you'll get what I mean. So what happens with a dart is you tend to get a little bit of a cup. Usually I will shape my petal first and then I dart last. So I'm going to do this backwards where I'm darting and then shaping, but let's say I shape and then I dart. You'll see that what it does is it gives a very natural shape to the petal. Another way of darting is what I like to call reverse darting. And reverse darting really only applies when you're using reverse cupping. So here we've got our reverse cupped. If you remember, we cupped this way. So I'm going to flip it over. This is the top. And you'll see that the crepe paper naturally does this. It has a tendency to naturally open up here, but tighten down here. And so it makes sense to take advantage of this when we're trying to create a narrower base at the petal. So I'm going to apply some glue. I'm going to press it. And you'll see that this is what it looks like now. So obviously it looks different from just the darted petal because this is reverse cupped, but the idea is the same. You have a very narrow petal base and grain lines that open up like a fan. So this is what it looks like, and this is what it looks like from the back. You can also create a narrow petal base by merely squeezing and twisting the base of the petal. So here I've got my petals all curled, and this is my petal base. But my petal base I find may be a little bit too wide. In which case, all I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of glue here, right at the base. I'm going to squeeze it, and I'm not going to worry too much about how much it looks on the side of the petal. I can fix that later. I'm going to squeeze, and then I'm going to use my index finger and my thumb to roll the space between them until the glue sticks. And then I'm going to take a look at my petal, and I can adjust it accordingly in terms of how I want to cup it. Do I want to fix the sides? But this is also a really good way. And sometimes you get these little crinkles, but sometimes and oftentimes you don't. The reason why I have these crinkles is because this is not stretched at all. So there's a lot more crepe paper here, and it's really obvious. If I was to stretch it, it wouldn't be as obvious. So here I am stretching. You see I'm stretching my petal, and I'm doing this. And you can see that the gathers here have loosened up a bit. It's definitely not as deep and not as obvious. But this is also another great way of narrowing the base. Let's talk a little bit about fringing. So when you're fringing, what that means is we're trying to create these little thin pieces of crepe paper coming out from a length of crepe paper strip that is attached at one side. And to do that, we just run our scissors and make cuts like so. So these are long cuts, or you can make shorter cuts. Now I'm using the tip of my scissors, but that might not be the best way. Especially if you're trying to make cuts that are really long, you're not going to be able to do that. Or if you want to do it fast, it's probably easier using this side. The other thing to consider too is when you're using the tip, it can break the end of the crepe paper. So if you do this and you do this too much, and this part here is, let's say, fine crepe paper, and your scissors are not sharp enough, what it'll do is it'll tear the crepe paper on the edge. Now this here is 180 gram. It's not stretched. So as you can see, it can be a little bit difficult sometimes because you can't really see where you're cutting. And it's not often that I would create a fringe that is this thick or this heavy. And normally what I do is I either laminate crepe paper or I just use it stretched. So here I've stretched the 180 grams, stretching it like this. So it's a lot thinner and it's easier for me to see where I'm cutting. So like this, a little bit easier to see. And I can still use the tip. This is okay because this crepe paper doesn't really tear. But my favorite way is actually using these guys here. They're spring-loaded back here, so that all I do is this. I don't actually need to physically open up the scissors. And I can just do this. And what I'm doing is I'm using my left hand, which is my non-dominant hand, at the bottom to support my scissors. So I'm kind of holding my scissors like this, because if you don't, you've got to control two hands, right? So using this hand here, I'm actually guiding my scissors going this way while I'm holding the length of it with my thumb. And as I'm doing this, I'm kind of sliding, this small motion of sliding the strip towards my scissors and using my index finger and my middle finger to guide my scissors across. And what I do here is as I'm closing my scissors, I'm actually not closing them completely. I'm stopping at a comfortable length for me, which is why a lot of times my fringes are always the same length, because I have a certain comfort level with how far I like to go on my scissors. But as you can see, I can create a lot finer strands or fringes when I'm using a thinner crepe paper, and I can go a lot faster. So what you want to do is you want to practice, and the more you practice, the thinner and finer your fringes will be. And as you do this, don't be afraid of fringes coming out. That happens a lot. So as you can see here, as I'm doing this, there is a little bit of fringe that's coming out, but that is going to be the only way that you're going to get very fine fringes. And you just practice. And you can do the same with these scissors as well. I know most people actually use regular scissors and not the spring-loaded. But whatever works for your hand, it's all practice. See what feels comfortable. And there's nothing wrong with making fringes this way either. Perhaps in a large flower, you want to have really strong stamens. See how strong they are? They stand on their own. They don't wilt at all. Versus these ones here, it's a lot softer, but this is going to be problematic if something squishes it. So there's pros and cons in either way, but this is how you would fringe your crepe paper when instructions ask you to do that. I'm going to show you 2 ways in which you can reduce the bulk of your fringe. So these 2 here are both 180 grams. They're stretched, so they are quite thin. However, once you start to roll it, or once you start to add a lot of fringes, it can add a lot of bulk to the stem wire, and that it makes it very difficult to finish the flower when there's a huge contrast in size between the flower bloom and the stem wire. So to do this, we try to reduce the bulk in the fringe. The fringe usually is in the center of the flower. And so starting from the center, we want to reduce as much bulk as possible that will be glued along the stem. So 2 ways to do that. I'm going to show you 2 ways. The first way here is to create little notches. So we're just going to cut little triangles like this onto the edge that is connected. And that's going to reduce all of this bulk from the base of the fringe. Another way is if you have serrated scissors, you can also do that. Use those scissors to create little serrated edges like this. But I tend to be very aggressive with reducing the bulk, so I like to have larger triangles, even ones that are almost up to the fringe. I'm okay with that too. Another way is to cut a slanted line. So here I've got the base of my fringes here. I'm just going to start on this side. It's easier to show. The base of my fringe, meaning the part that is attached, is here. And I'm going to start about 1/4 of an inch below and cut right diagonally across to this corner. So what you're looking at is something like this. So starting just below the fringe, so I don't want to cut into the fringe. That's going to loosen the fringe. The fringe is going to come out. I'm just going to come from here and cut all the way to the corner. And I mean, I try to cut as straight as possible, but sometimes it's not possible. So straight as possible is good enough. All right, there we go. So you see, I've eliminated this whole section, which is probably equivalent to this. Let me show you how to finish your wires using Floral Tape and Crepe Tape. So Floral Tape is this stuff here. It's sticky when you pull it to activate the glue, and it'll stick to each other. This one here sticks only when activated. So I've cut a length off, and I've got here a 16 gauge stem wire. So what I do is first I remember I need to stretch it to activate the glue, and then there's glue on both sides. And then I hold my stem wire in my hand, my dominant hand, and then I have my floral tape on my non-dominant hand. And then what I do is I start here just below the tip and end of the stem wire. I go back up and then I come back down, and that way it locks it into place. So I'm just going to go up and I'm rolling it. So I'm placing my stem wire on top of the floral tape. I'm rolling it, and as I roll it, it will hopefully go up. So it's rolled up. And then I'm going to go past the tip and I'm going to come back down. I'm just going to fold it slightly and then come back down like this. And as I'm coming back down, this is where I am going to start rolling my stem wire down while my left hand, my non-dominant hand, is holding onto the floral tape. I'm stretching it, I'm making sure that it's taut. I'm doing this at a 45-degree angle to this stem wire. And as I do that, I actually prefer to hold the top. Some people prefer to hold the bottom. Essentially what I'm doing is I'm using my index finger and my thumb to roll the stem wire between my hand. Meanwhile, I am holding on to this one, the floral tape, really taut with my other hand and making it and kind of rolling it also with my thumb to make sure it's smooth. So the important thing here when you're doing this is not to be too aggressive with how much you actually wrap. Just do it slowly. And as you practice, it'll get smoother and smoother. So the angle here I like is actually about 45 degrees, a little bit less, and you get something a lot smoother. When it's when you are using an angle that is more perpendicular, you get a lot more of this spiral happening. So once you run out, I'm just gonna cut another strip, pull to activate, and come back up. I'm going to overlap it slightly with where it ended, and then come back down and do the same thing. And again, you know, I do it like this, along length, it's a little bit smoother. The cool thing about floral tape is that you can just tear it, but I'm going to cut it and fold it back in to cover the end, and then you've got something that looks like that. With crepe tape, it's a little bit different. I'm using a green crepe tape here, and this one is the Chinese heavy crepe in moss green. So I've got my grain lines going this way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut across the grain line. So I'm actually going to fold it. It's easier. Cutting through 4 layers. I've got my grain lines going this way, and I'm going to cut a strip. This is about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch. So that's very thin, and you know you've done it correctly when you can actually just pull it like this. I'm just going to cut it out the edge. I've got my tacky glue. I'm just going to dot this crepe tape with glue, about 2 inches. I'm going to take my 16 gauge stem wire, and in this case, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to start from the bottom and come up, and then come back down. I'm just going to close this tip off and then come back down like this. If it tears, all you have to do is slap it back on and continue from where you ended. And I apply glue as I go. And you don't want to apply glue on the entire strip all at once because it gets really messy. Oh, same thing. So I'm doing the same thing. I'm using my dominant hand to roll. I'm using my left hand to pull and guide, but I'm also spreading the glue with my thumb as I go along like this. And that way I use every inch of the glue that I have. And here I'm just gonna close it and come back up, and I'm gonna rip it. There we go. So that's 2 ways to finish your stem wires.